Hi folks, so we are going to look at the final topic of Unit 2 today, which is blood glucose levels and obesity. Now, the order I'm putting this up is not quite right, despite the fact this is the last topic. I still haven't done a cardiovascular disease video, but because we're covering this in class tomorrow, that's Friday, I've decided to put this up for anybody that can't make the lesson. Anyway, right, so this is quite a short section. The reason why it's short is because it's based quite heavily on stuff you should know already from National 5. Now, if you're not massively familiar with National 5, what I would tell you to do is to go to the Bite Size website or something similar and have a look at the control and communication topic, specifically the bit that refers to hormones and the control of blood glucose. Because the first thing we're going to talk about is the control of blood glucose levels. I'm going to explain to you very briefly why that's so important as well, and the link between glucose level and atherosclerosis, which of course is one of the major cardiovascular diseases we discussed in the last topic, and the associated condition of obesity, which you would be most likely to have if you have elevated blood glucose levels for a number of different reasons, which we'll talk about as well. So, to start off with, I want to recap on what we know about blood glucose levels and how they are controlled in the body. So you should know by now that blood glucose levels are controlled by a number of hormones. There are two hormones at play which have equal and opposite actions from each other. I'm going to use a nifty kind of diagram that I've always used at National 5 level, and that is to try and show that glucose can exist as separate molecules in the blood. So use these little individual squares with G in them to denote small individual soluble glucose molecules. So if we were to take a large meal or anything like that, our blood glucose level would elevate. We would have more of these glucose molecules floating through absorbed in our plasma. And that's where we would say our blood glucose levels were elevated. The body has to do something about that. This is where maybe higher comes into it a wee bit more. Elevated blood glucose levels are a problem because they diffuse very easily, and the constant diffusion of glucose into cells, despite the fact that cells might not be able to deal with them, which is the main reason why obesity is associated with glucose, the constant damage that ends up being caused by lots and lots of excessive diffusion of glucose can actually start to damage the endothelium, which, as you know by now, can lead to atherosclerosis. So an atheroma can form as a result of elevated blood glucose levels. So there's plenty of reasons why we need to bring blood glucose levels back down when they're elevated. But there's nothing we can do about the fact that they do go up after a meal. If you have a large meal, your blood glucose level goes up, your body does something to bring that back down. Now, those of you that have done National 5 should be able to reasonably quickly tell me exactly what the body does with that glucose. Glucose is a very useful molecule, so it certainly doesn't want to be getting rid of it. We know that we need glucose as the main substrate for aerobic respiration, so we don't want to be throwing any of it away. But it's like anything you would do with something which is useful but you have too much of, you store it up, and that's exactly what happens. So glucose in the blood is stored up in a large insoluble form. So all the glucose molecules that were free in the blood are now being stored up as this big insoluble molecule, which is called glycogen, and is stored in the liver. Okay, so glucose in the blood is converted to glycogen in the liver. Inside liver cells, this big insoluble molecule means the glucose is kind of trapped in there, it's stored because that big molecule can't actually pass through cell membranes, so it gets kept. On the other hand though, that's not just the only story, because you're having the opposite scenario where the body actually needs a supply of glucose. Your body's not always got an elevated glucose level, and sometimes your blood glucose level is going to be too low. And as much as I've told you all the bad things about glucose, your blood glucose level being too low is dangerous as well. So the body's got to do something about that. So it takes some of the glycogen in the liver. Exactly, it makes sense, doesn't it? If you've got something you've stored up till when you need it, and then all of a sudden you need it, you release that, don't you? You release it as glucose into the bloodstream. So the glycogen is converted back into glucose in the bloodstream. Now, at this stage, those of you with National 5 insight should be able to identify what hormone is responsible for both of those reactions. We have the glucose being converted into glycogen is caused by insulin, and the glycogen being released into the blood as glucose, the hormone responsible for that is glucagon. And both of these hormones are released by the pancreas. The pancreas is very, very important. I'll just write that word down as well and give you a little bit of background on the pancreas. The pancreas is considered to be part of the digestive system, but it's not actually involved in the active digestion of food. One of the main things it does though is it detects changes in blood glucose levels. So it will know if the blood glucose level is too high and it will release insulin. If the blood glucose level is too low, it will detect that and release glucagon. Now that is nothing new to those of you who have done National 5 biology. There should be nothing new on the board at all. What is introduced at higher level to this is the concept of adrenaline. Now, adrenaline is a chemical released by your adrenal glands. It's released by parts of the brain. And it's released, as you probably know about adrenaline, it's released in response to being stressed in some way or excited, or if someone is trying to basically to try and give you a burst of energy. That's what adrenaline tries to do. It gives you a very, very quick burst of energy. A very short period of time, but a burst nonetheless. And in order to get that energy, of course, we need to produce more ATP. And in order to produce more ATP, we must have an elevated, very temporarily elevated level of glucose in the body. And that's exactly what happens. Adrenaline causes a glucose spike. Now we think about what it must have to do in order to cause that glucose spike. Its action, when it's released, is it has a negative reaction on insulin. It inhibits insulin. So it's because it stops insulin from doing its job, we don't get the excess glucose that would normally be getting stored up. It doesn't get stored up. So the blood glucose level remains higher than it should. In exactly the same way, adrenaline will promote glucagon. So it will actually very briefly, bring a little bit of glycogen out into the blood as glucose. So we get that blood glucose spike, it gives us an energy boost, an energy burst. That's what adrenaline does. So it's got opposite effects on insulin as it does on glucagon, which makes sense, of course, because we know that glucagon and insulin have opposite effects on the liver. Okay? So, give you a little bit of time to sort of take that in. The only other thing we talk about in this topic is a condition called diabetes. Now, diabetes is directly related to the ability to control blood glucose level. And there are two different types of diabetes. You may well know this already. Type 1 diabetes and type 2 diabetes. Both type 1 first. Type 1 diabetes is generally inherited. It is a problem your body has in producing insulin. So that's the type of person that might need an injection of insulin or will need an injection of insulin because they can't make it for themselves. Type 1 diabetes, there are different things that can cause it, but generally speaking, it's not the person's fault who has type 1 diabetes. As harsh as that sounds, type 2 diabetes is typically caused by poor diet, poor level of exercise, prolonged high intake of sugar, also associated with obesity, type 2 diabetes. And type 2 diabetes is not a problem in producing insulin. You can produce insulin, quite the thing, but where your body will not react properly to it. It's called the desensitization to insulin. So this is a failure to produce insulin. And type 2, just write that up so you can sort of pause it. failure to produce insulin, and type 2 diabetes is a failure to respond to insulin. And so they're very different from each other. And type 2 diabetes can be undone. You can actually undo the effects of it by improving your diet, improving your exercise. There's very little you can really do about the fact you have type 1 diabetes. You just have to deal with it, you have to manage it, and you have to take insulin injections to give you that insulin that you can't produce yourself. Okay? Now the third and final section of this topic refers to obesity. Now, I'm quite sure you've heard of the word obese. It is a clinical term, which means that it's recognised by a doctor. It's not a case of saying, oh, as is overweight. It's calculated by working out a person's BMI. The reason why we talk about it in the context of blood glucose is because you normally associate obesity. There is a definite link with obesity and type 2 diabetes, and also obesity and sugar intake as well. When your body has used all the sugar it possibly can to produce ATP, stored all the glucose it possibly can as glycogen, and there's still more coming in because you just drink far too much fizzy juice, you eat far too many sweets, your body will turn the sugar that you take in into fat, and will obviously make you put on weight. Now, the BMI, with the possible exception of calculating cardiac output, this is the only place in higher biology where you're going to be expected to know the equation for something. Okay, so if we want to calculate a person's BMI, what you do is you take their weight in kilograms and you divide it by their height in centimetres squared. That's how you calculate BMI. And a BMI of 30 or more means you are obese. Okay, so again, just let that absorb. One more thing I hadn't mentioned when I should have mentioned is a glucose tolerance test. Now that's something that's worthwhile understanding at this level. A way to possibly diagnose having diabetes is a glucose tolerance test. Basically what happens is it measures blood glucose over time. And what happens is you give a patient, you might take their base blood glucose level, and then you give the patient a large glucose drink, so like a sugary drink. Obviously what you start to see is happening is blood glucose level goes up, and then over time goes back down to normal. Right? That's pretty much what any non-diabetic person will do. Blood glucose level goes up, insulin, that's detected by the pancreas, insulin kicks in and brings it back down again. Somebody with diabetes, on the other hand, mild diabetes, you might find blood glucose level will go up and it will stay high for a very long time. And in actual fact, the only reason really why it's going down is because it's being used, because your insulin's not really doing anything. Somebody with really extreme diabetes might even already have an elevated blood glucose level, and it might be a way up like that already. Right, and that's very, very dangerous, considering blue is normal. You can see how different red is from being normal. So that's what's called the glucose tolerance test, and it can be used to diagnose diabetes, because you can see that if the body is struggling to bring blood glucose back down to normal. Okay, so that's, apologies for that last bit being slightly out of order. This would be in the context of diabetes, this last bit. So just to cover what we've gone over, we talked about the control of blood glucose, insulin, glucagon and adrenaline working together. We then briefly spoke about the two different types of diabetes, at which point we should think about the glucose tolerance test, and the third and final thing was the idea of obesity and the calculation of BMI. to diagnose obesity. Okay, right, thanks folks.